Alaskan communities depend on the sea for their livelihood. The Exxon Valdez oil spill created years of devastation from an accident that took less than 30 minutes and could easily have been avoided. The Exxon Corporation is an American multinational oil and gas company. It was started by John D. Rockefeller as Standard Oil and changed its name to Exxon in 1972. It's vertically integrated across the entire oil and gas industry, which means it owns companies throughout the supply chain from oil exploration to platforms extracting oil and gas, shipping, processing, and selling at the pump. It also has a chemicals division that produces plastic, synthetic rubber, and other chemical products. By the late 1980s, Exxon is one of the largest and most powerful companies in the world. In the late 1960s, oil is discovered in Prudhoe Bay. A pipeline is built to transport oil from Prudhoe in northern Alaska to Valdez in the south. In 1977, the first ship sails out of Valdez with its cargo of black gold. In order to keep up with demand, new ships are built, and in December 1986, Exxon takes delivery of the Exxon Valdez. At 987 feet long, 167 feet wide, and 88 feet deep, the Exxon Valdez is the largest ship built on the west coast of the US. The ship can carry 62 million gallons of oil in its single hull design, enough to fill over 100 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The cargo in a single hull design fills directly into the hull, where a double hull design has tanks within the hull to create a separation between the cargo and the hull. The Exxon Valdez sails from Valdez in southern Alaska to California. It's a route that's well charted, but it has a set of hazards to navigate. All ships leaving Valdez must first sail out of Port Valdez and into the Valdez Arm. The Valdez Arm is a narrow strait, and a local ship's pilot comes on board to navigate this section of the waterway. After passing through the Narrows, a ship enters a TSS, or Traffic Separation Scheme, which is like a giant shipping highway. The start of the TSS is in line with Rocky Point Light. Ships sailing at night must track their progress on a chart and confirm their location using lights that mark obstacles to avoid. Ships must stick to their lane inside the TSS. They sail on the right-hand side unless they need to avoid an obstacle like an iceberg. Icebergs from the Columbia Glacier often drift south into Prince William Sound. The carefully constructed path of the TSS helps a ship navigate in deep water and avoid shallow water hazards like Bligh Reef. Bligh Reef is located at the edge of Prince William Sound and is marked by a flashing light. Provided a ship on its way out to sea keeps the light on their port or left-hand side, they'll avoid the shallow reef. They then follow the TSS through Prince William Sound and into the Gulf of Alaska, where they enter open water. At 23:30 on the 22nd of March 1989, the Exxon Valdez docks at the Valdez Marine Terminal, ready to load oil for the voyage to California. Loading oil into a ship is considered a high-risk operation, and so the crew of the Valdez are on watch. Captain Joseph Hazelwood goes onshore for meetings and returns to the ship 30 minutes before its departure. At 21:12 on the 23rd of March, almost 24 hours after docking, the tanker leaves the terminal loaded with 53 million gallons of crude oil and harbor pilot William Murphy. Able Seaman Jones is on watch. Her usual position is at the bow, but she has a cold and asks if she can stand watch near the bridge, which gives her an opportunity to step inside from time to time and keep warm. Captain Joseph Hazelwood retires to his cabin at 21:25, leaving the harbor pilot William Murphy and third mate Gregory Cousins to navigate the Valdez Narrows. They're accompanied by a single tug for the passage, which is about a 7-mile journey. At 22:49, the ship reports to the Valdez Vessel Traffic Center that it's passed out of the Narrows and is increasing speed. At 23:24, the pilot calls the captain back to the bridge. Third mate Cousins helps the pilot disembark from the vessel. The pilot climbs down the side of the vessel and is collected by a pilot boat. Third mate Cousins reports to traffic control that the pilot has left the vessel. He also advises that they'll deviate from the predetermined traffic lane to avoid small icebergs, which is common practice. The vessel is placed on a due south course and set on autopilot. At 23:30, Captain Hazelwood informs the Valdez Traffic Center that he's turning the ship toward the east on a heading of 200 degrees and reducing speed to wind his way through the ice, but the speed of the engines continues to build. Third mate Cousins plots a fix at 23:39 that shows the ship in the middle of the traffic separation scheme. Ships plot a fix onto the chart to track their progress through the water. A mark is placed on the chart to show a position at a specific time. Captain Hazelwood orders a further course change to a heading of 180 degrees due south and tells the helmsman to put the ship back on autopilot, which will then hold the ship on that course. The captain doesn't notify the Valdez Traffic Center of this change of course. From 23:30, for a total of almost 20 minutes, the ship sails south through the inbound traffic lane, then across its easterly boundary and out of the traffic separation scheme entirely. By 23:47, the vessel has left the traffic lane's eastern boundary. Third mate Cousins has been on duty for 6 hours. Second mate Lloyd LeCan Jr. is scheduled to start his watch, but Cousins decides not to wake the second mate because of the long hours he's worked during loading, and he's sure Lloyd will appreciate a lie-in. Cousins remains on duty. He's the only officer on the bridge for most of the night, which goes against company policy, but the crew are a little more flexible. At 23:50, Able Seaman Jones, on watch outside the bridge, reports a red light on the starboard or right side of the boat, which should be to port. Cousins and Hazelwood don't discuss the discrepancy or review the chart together. At 23:52, Captain Hazelwood gives the command to place the ship's engine on Load Program Up. Load Program Up is a computer program that runs over 43 minutes, increasing the engine speed from 55 revs per minute to full speed ahead at 78.7 revs per minute. Hazelwood then gives third mate Cousins instructions to return the ship to the traffic separation scheme when Busby Island Light is abeam to port or directly to the left of the ship. Then the captain leaves the bridge to send some messages. Third mate Cousins switches the ship to hand steering mode. At 23:57, he orders the helmsman to put the rudder to starboard 10 degrees. He doesn't watch the rudder angle indicator to ensure the rudder is actually applied. He notifies Captain Hazelwood that he's started to turn the vessel back toward the traffic lanes. At 23:59, Cousins notices that the heading isn't changing and orders the rudder increased to starboard 20 degrees. He checks the radar looking for icebergs. At midnight, going into the 24th of March, Able Seaman Jones outside the bridge reports that the Bligh Reef light appears far off the starboard bow at 45 degrees. That's to the right of the vessel when it should be to the left. The ship's in danger. The third mate orders hard starboard rudder. At 1 minute past midnight, the vessel's heading swings to starboard, which means the ship is pointing in the right direction, but the radar indicates the vessel, under the momentum of its increasing speed, is still following a 180-degree track. Cousins calls Captain Hazelwood by phone to let him know there's an emergency. Before they can finish their conversation, the hull of the ship makes contact with the reef. At 12:04, the crew experience a bumpy ride and 6 very sharp jolts as the ship runs aground on Bligh Reef. The ship's momentum carries it high onto the pinnacle of the rocks, where it comes to an abrupt stop under its own weight. 8 out of the 11 cargo holds are punctured in the single hull design, which means oil is free to leak directly into the water. The captain steps onto the bridge and starts to make a plan to get the ship floating again. First, he attempts to steam off the rocks. He orders the engines to be powered up and the rudder hard to port, then starboard. The crew comply. The ship doesn't budge. At 12:19, Hazelwood gives an order to reduce the engines to idle speed. Hazelwood radios the Valdez Traffic Center and reports the situation to Bruce Blanford, a civilian employee of the Coast Guard who's on duty. The news travels from Valdez to Anchorage to Houston and eventually around the world, while the search for a cleanup crew and machinery gets started. At 12:30, the chief mate James Kunkel uses a computer program and determines that even though the stress on the vessel exceeds acceptable limits, the ship still has the required stability to stay afloat in its current position. He goes to the bridge to tell Captain Hazelwood that the vessel shouldn't go to sea or leave the area. The captain sends him back to the control room to assess the damage further and give him some options. At 12:35, Hazelwood orders the engine back to full ahead and begins another series of rudder movements in an effort to free the vessel. By 0100, after running his computer program through a series of scenarios, Chief Mate James Kunkel finds that the ship doesn't have the ability to support itself without the support of the reef. He gives the captain the news and reiterates that the ship should not leave the area. But Captain Hazelwood keeps the engine running while maneuvering the rudder in an attempt to free the ship. At 0141, Hazelwood finally accepts that the vessel is steadfast on the reef and orders the engines to be turned off. Within 7 hours of the Exxon Valdez going aground, the oil slick is about 100 feet wide and 4 or 5 miles long. The authorities take a urine sample from Captain Hazelwood at 10 o'clock in the morning as a matter of course in an accident. He has a blood alcohol content of 0.1. At midday, the Exxon Baton Rouge arrives on the scene. The oil slick is already 3 miles wide and 5 miles long. By 1800, cleanup crews arrive and drop dispersant onto the oil floating on the surface of the water. But it doesn't work very well because there's not enough wave action to mix it with the oil. Dispersants are chemicals that break down oil and help it mix with water. It doesn't actually help to remove oil from the water, but instead it's a tool used to help the oil mix with and sink into the water so that it's no longer visible at the surface. The dispersant used is called Corexit. At 0736 on the 25th of March, more than 24 hours after the Valdez has run aground, the Exxon Baton Rouge starts to pump oil out of the Valdez to lighten its load and stop any further oil spilling into the ocean. Later that night, 2 ships drive through the oil slick towing a fire-resistant boom. They separate about 15,000 gallons of crude oil from the main spill and ignite it in a controlled burn. About 100 square feet of tarry residue is left over. This is the only controlled burn used during the cleanup. Weather conditions make further burns unpredictable. Almost 48 hours after the Valdez runs aground, the oil slick has reached 16.5 miles southwest of Bligh Reef. The isolated area makes it difficult to bring in equipment and personnel. Over the weeks and months that follow, a monumental cleanup operation removes tons of oil from the ocean and beaches throughout the region. Deaths of local wildlife are recorded between 100,000 to 250,000 seabirds, at least 2,800 sea otters, over 300 harbor seals, 247 bald eagles, 22 orcas, and an unknown number of salmon and herring. Despite Exxon producing an ecological impact study and declaring that Prince William Sound has recovered, it's healthy and it's thriving. In 2015, scientists estimate that 16 to 21,000 gallons of oil remain on beaches in Prince William Sound. The main components of Corexit, the dispersant used to mix the oil into the ocean during the cleanup, is 2-butoxyethanol. It's been identified as one of the agents that caused liver, kidney, lung, nervous system, and blood disorders in the men and women taking part in the cleanup in Alaska after the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. Single-hull oil tankers have been largely replaced by double-hull ships. In 1994, Exxon was fined $5 billion in damages and restitution to the local Alaskan people whose livelihoods were devastated by the oil spill. Exxon fought this ruling in the Court of Appeals until 2007, when it was reduced to $2.5 billion, forcing local Alaskan communities to wait almost 20 years after the incident for the compensation they needed to rebuild their lives. In 2007, Exxon generated $2.5 billion of revenue in 2 days.